Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the OFN Today on the Ourlads Football Network as we talk Buffalo Bills football with Ryan Talbot. He's the Bills writer for NewYorkUpstate.com at New York Upstate. Did I get that right, Ryan?
Yeah, NewYorkUpstate.com. Absolutely.
Excellent. And of course, Ryan, you've been with us for a couple of years now. You've also helped us when we've been on our Jet Show, which has been dominated by the Bills, of course, which is good for you, not for me, or at least good for the people who follow you, not for my followers. But anyway, fact is, the Buffalo Bills are coming off a very successful playoff run. And the next step, that's what you always look at when you're a team on the rise. You go to the playoffs. The next year, you win your playoff game. The next stop is trying to get to the Super Bowl, and that's always the hard part, especially when right now you take a look at it, the Bills will have the 30th pick in the first round, 7 picks in all. So the draft capital is okay, but it's not great as far as the first round pick status, but that's okay. That's what you get for being a winning team. And cap space is pretty much dead even. So there's Brandon Beane's got his work cut out for him to juggle some contracts to free up some cap space. But last year, Diggs was the big one that came in via trade. I don't anticipate, unless I'm wrong, I don't anticipate a player like that stature to come in. J.J. Watt's name has surfaced, but he's towards the end of his career. So would I be right to say that we're not going to see any kind of impact deals with players, in the prime of their careers, ranging from 26 to 28 years old?
No, I think that's definitely fair to say. Now, could Brendan Bean surprise us? Absolutely. But he did go on record and say, I'm not anticipating making any big moves or splash moves like that Stephon Diggs. So, a J.J. Watt, he doesn't qualify, like you said, because of his age necessarily. Still obviously has a lot of name value. But I don't expect the Bills to be big spenders or to pull off any kind of mega trades here leading up to the draft.
All right, now let's take a look. Actually, tell you what, before we move on, let's talk about Watt. That's been the name that has surfaced the most for the Bills. Tell us a little bit about how realistic that is.
Yeah, I think it's very realistic, to be quite honest. There's already been a report that the interest is mutual between Buffalo and J.J. Watt. Watt is supposedly looking for a team that has a quarterback. Well, Josh Allen answered all the questions there. A team where he can win a championship. The Bills made it to the AFC Championship game. A team that has cap space right now, like you said. The Bills, if they end up around that 183, 184 million amount, the Bills will be about even to start, so then they're going to have to make some moves. You can get rid of John Brown, save about $8 million. You can make some moves on your defensive line. Mario Addison, Vernon Butler, save some money there. Lee Smith saves 2. Tyler Matakevich could save 3. There's money to be moved around and money to be had if the Bills need it, so they could free up enough to have a guy like J.J. Watt join the team. And having Watt join would also be good for an A.J. Epinesa, who dropped weight as he was asked to as a rookie, and says he wants to mold and model his game after J.J. Watt. So having him in the room with him could go a long way in his long-term development. So I think they're in it. Sounds like the Browns are in on him as well. Some mutual interest there. And then obviously he's been linked to the Packers, who are in a worse salary cap spot than Buffalo. The Steelers, who don't seem to necessarily have that quarterback anymore. But it'll be interesting to see what Watt ultimately decides.
All right, well, let's go down the depth chart right now, starting first of all, of course. Well, Josh Allen, I mean, what was the biggest reason? Because it's just not normal for a quarterback that is not considered an accurate quarterback in college. And then his first couple of years, what is he, like 52%, 58%? All right, he's had his improvement. Maybe we can get him to 60, 61. And then just absolutely just goes on fire for 69% completion percentage, something he's never done in college, something he's never done in the pros. What do you attribute to that the most?
Well, I think putting NFL talent around him. I mean, obviously at Wyoming, he wasn't playing with much NFL level talent. There's a few players here and there. Year one in the NFL was Kelvin Benjamin, Andre Holmes, and Zay Jones. Not exactly a great trio of wide receivers for him to work with. And then obviously year two, they add Cole Beasley, they add John Brown. He makes some strides, and he adds Stephon Diggs, a true number 1 wide receiver, and that opens up a lot for a young quarterback. So I think the talent around him helps, but obviously Josh Allen puts a lot of work into his game as well. He works a lot with Jordan Palmer in the offseason. Palmer paid for someone to come in and kind of scan Josh Allen's throwing motion. They noticed that the motion was off. He worked to improve on that, and that obviously helped significantly too in terms of his ball placement and his overall accuracy.
All right, let's talk about the running game, because this is where Josh Allen has to get help. I don't do, from my point of view, there's any question about that. Devin Singletary appeared to take a step down in year two. What was that? You can attribute that maybe a little bit to the offensive line, but even just personally, himself as an individual, what did you think? Do you agree that his game just wasn't on par with his rookie season?
No, I definitely agree with that. You know, as a rookie, he tied for the league lead in terms of yards per carry. He obviously didn't have the workload of a Derrick Henry, who I believe is who he tied with that year. But he showed some flashes, some talent. I think a lot of it was in his head. He seemed to be thinking too much when he had the ball in his hands. He wouldn't hit the hole. He wouldn't hit the lane when there was one available. Now, mind you, there was also many times where he had the ball and all of a sudden there was someone in the backfield waiting for him, and it's very difficult in that regard. So I think the backfield as a whole had a down year, Zach Moss included, but some of it's the offensive line, some of it's that the wide receivers and tight ends didn't block very well. There are a lot of reasons that altogether formed this issue, but I'm not ready to say that the Bills need to make a big splash at running back, whether that's free agency or the draft. I think that they still have something in Moss and Singletary. I think that Antonio Williams, the undrafted free agent that ran all over the Dolphins in Week 17, has the potential to be a factor in that backfield. So I like the room that they have. They may not have superstar potential, but Buffalo's offense is going to go through the passing game, so you don't necessarily need a superstar in the backfield if you're not going to utilize one on a regular basis.
Do you think then that means, since you have a couple or three young running backs, that chances are the Bills might say, let's see if we can add a veteran?
I think it's a possibility. I mean, if you look at what they did at the end of the season, they signed Devonta Freeman to their practice squad just in case, there was another injury, just in case there's an opportunity for him to play. Brendan Bean is good about that, adding some veterans into the mix, obviously. In Singletary's first year, Frank Gore was here. TJ Yeldon, although he's still relatively young, has been in the NFL for quite a few years. He's been another veteran presence on this team. So they like to do that at other positions as well. It wouldn't shock me if they brought in some competition, but it would have to be someone on the relatively cheap side. Someone that, could possibly land a spot on this roster, but isn't guaranteed one either at the same time.
And there are a lot of those guys around, so I'm sure that
I'm
sure the Bills will find someone. What about Moss? What did you think about his rookie season?
Well, he had some flashes where he ran the ball really well, but then he had some injuries. He had some setbacks. He had turf toe that kept him out for a few weeks. He had a game where he was pulled for the most part after he fumbled coming out of the end zone against the 49ers, so he had some learning experiences there. I think the talent is there for him to become Buffalo's lead back. I think that's what they were starting to angle towards at the end of the season before he suffered that serious injury in the Colts game in the playoffs. Okay. But there's definitely room to grow as well.
All right. Now, the tight end position, Dawson Knox. A lot of people thought this was going to be a breakout year for him, but he had the 3 C's, concussion, calf, and COVID. That all worked against Dawson Knox. So is it expected that when he's healthy, maybe next year will be the year that he breaks out?
I think there's a possibility. He definitely came on later in the year, scoring touchdowns. Wasn't necessarily filling up the stat sheet, but he was getting open in the end zone, in the red zone, becoming a playmaker for Josh Allen on the broken play against the Colts when Josh looked like he was running it and he threw it last second. It was Dawson Knox that got open. So he was definitely becoming more of a factor later in the year. But I think that's the position where you probably want to get a veteran, whether you wait out a Kyle Rudolph, because I think that it's just a matter of time before the Vikings release him. He's already said twice, I'm not taking a pay cut. If it comes down to it, I think they would release him because they have Irv Smith there. I would like that match. You could bring in some veterans in free agency, still some younger guys, so you could run some 12 personnel Gerald Everett, Dan Arnold, someone like that. Someone that takes a little bit of the pressure off of Knox, because even though year three is usually a very big year for younger players, we have to also remember that it might take even longer than 3 years for Knox. He was not utilized much at Ole
Yeah.
Miss. Ole Miss went through their wide receivers. He was drafted based on his skill set, his athleticism, what he could end up being, and it's going to take some time, I think, to unlock all of that.
All right. At wide receiver, we know about, of course, Diggs. Beasley, he's going to be 32 this year, so he is starting to get up there in age. That's going to be something that I'm sure the Bills are going to start looking towards the future. That's an important position, the slot position for any offense. But Gabriel Davis, he actually had the second most snaps for the wide receiver position on the team. And look, any rookie is going to have a low completion percentage. That's not a big deal. But he was second on the team with 7 touchdowns. He led the receivers with a 17-yard average. So all in all, a very good rookie season.
Yeah, he was outstanding. A real great pick by Brendan Bean in the 4th round of the draft. He does a lot of things well, but the one thing I'll say he maybe does the best is when Josh Allen has to take off, roll to his right, move around in the pocket. He does a good job of breaking off his route and getting open along the sidelines. He made 2 huge catches in that Colts wild card game when the Bills are really struggling offensively to move the chains, to get open downfield, to get his feet in bounds. So really good body control, really good hands. And the thing is, even with 7 touchdowns, he had the opportunity to have a few more this year. He had one that he dropped in the end zone against the Patriots on that first matchup, the 24-21 matchup. He had 1 or 2 called back on penalty. So we could be sitting here talking about how the rookie wide receiver had 10 touchdowns, in 2020, and it wouldn't have been preposterous. I think that he's going to be the number 2 wide receiver this upcoming season. I think John Brown just makes too much sense to there's not enough reasons to keep him around at this point in his career.
Okay.
Suffered through some injuries, not the cap cost isn't there. Now, if he restructures, if he renegotiates and he's willing to take a pay cut, absolutely you can keep him in the fold. But I think you can do some damage with Davis on one side, Stephon Diggs on the other, Beasley in the slot, and you can find a number 4 wide receiver that gives you that speed that John Brown did. You don't need someone that's going to be a regular play, 70, 80, 90% of the snaps. You can bring in someone that can play a smaller percentage, whether it's a Kenny Stills who was on the practice squad late in the year. John Ross, I know that he really hasn't developed into the football player. A lot of players or people thought that he could be, but he still has some blazing speed that he could be utilized in that role. There are some cheap options out there, and if the Bills want to open up the purse strings a little bit, they could even go into that middle tier of free agents that are out there. And also this draft class has some talent, too.
Yeah, it seems like nowadays the passing game has trickled down all the way to college, and there are a ton of wide receivers available every year, it seems. What about McKenzie? Does he have a future here? He's an unrestricted free agent.
Yeah, McKenzie's interesting because I've gone back and forth on that. In Week 17 when Beasley was hurt, he played a really big role in that win. He had 2 receiving touchdowns. He had a punt return touchdown. Just looked like a dynamic player. But then in the playoffs, he really wasn't utilized much, didn't play much. I think that there's a fit for him here if he wants to return. But he may have made some money this year, showing that he can do a little bit of everything. And there could be a team that may offer him a little bit more than what's expected. Yep. But if he's in that $3 million range, I could see the Bills bringing him back just because they know he knows the system. They know that he can be a weapon for them when they want to utilize him. And like you said, Cole Beasley is getting older. If something were to happen to Beasley, Isaiah McKenzie can fill in that role right in the slot.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on that as well, obviously. Now let's take a look at the offensive line, because as we were talking about in the running game, this definitely had a big part in that, even though the outside, the bookend tackles were fantastic. Deion Dawkins just seems to get better and better every year. Darrell Williams, what a revelation. Didn't have a great year in 2019, signed with the team, and had maybe his best season as a pro. But now he's an unrestricted free agent again. He's a tackle. He's probably going to make a lot of money. Do you think the team will be able to re-sign him?
He's one of the big 2 in terms of the potential unrestricted free agents. It's Darrell Williams and Matt Milano. And I think that of the two, Williams is much likelier to come back than Milano.
Oh,
I think
okay.
that there could be a price point where the Bills could agree to bring Darrell Williams back into the fold. Like you said, he played really well. I think that the Bills really benefited from the fact that the Panthers tried playing him at 4 different spots the year before that. And obviously, you would struggle if you're being told you're starting at left guard this week, right
Sure.
tackle 1 week, left tackle 1 week. He played he started at 4 of the 5 spots along the line, and it's no wonder that he struggled. So he comes off this down year. Buffalo says, listen, we're going to sign you. We're going to play you at right tackle. You have to win the job, but that's where we're going to play you, or right guard, one of the two, wherever the chips fall at the end of the day, that we're going to keep you in that spot. He wins the right tackle competition. He plays extremely well all year. So if he does leave, he's earned that payday. He's shown that if you keep him in one role, he can still play at a very high level. The rest of the line, you said it. Deion Dawkins gets better every year. Mitch Morse is really interesting to me. You could cut him, but then there'd be a high dead cap hit for the Bills. So you could either make him a post-June designation. You could try to get him to restructure. He is still a very good center, but there's concussion concerns. He had one in his first season with Buffalo, but leading up to the regular season. He had one this year where then they made him pretty much a healthy scratch in that Cardinals game. He was active, but he never actually played in that matchup. And he's not a guy that's going to be a powerful blocker. He uses finesse. He uses his athleticism. He's really good at pulling and things like that. So it depends on what the Bills really want to do there. But I think there's a good chance he returns. John Feliciano is another unrestricted free agent. He's come out and said he expects to be in Buffalo next year. So I could see him starting at left guard or right guard. It depends on where they want to put Cody Ford, because Cody Ford's that missing piece. He's been injured the last 2 years. Brendan Bean spoke very highly of him, sounded like he expects him to start this upcoming season, and I think it's going to be at guard. You could play him at left or right guard. It depends on where the Bills think he's most comfortable. Feliciano can fill the other spot. Like Butker is a restricted free agent. You could bring him back for depth. So they still have a lot of talent there. It just depends on what they want to do. Do they want to go to add some more guys that are maulers that could maybe help the run game? Who knows? It's going to be really interesting to see what they end up doing there.
Yeah, because now Ford started the first year outside at right tackle, moved inside last year. We talked about that in the preseason. That seems to be his best fit, but he had the injuries too. Was that the main reason that he just wasn't able to develop moving to guard? The injuries, that's what held him back?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, he was out pretty much all of this past season with the injuries. Once he was injured, he was out for the rest of the year. So that's definitely what's delaying the progress there. But obviously, just like any other player, year 3 is going to be huge for him to show that he has a long-term future here in Buffalo and that he is a piece to this puzzle.
Is this, though, would you consider the offensive line the biggest need offensively in the draft?
Depends on what happens with Feliciano and Darrell Williams. If Darrell Williams leaves, then yes, absolutely. I shift my focus to finding a right tackle prospect in round 1 or round 2. And obviously, like a Liam Eichenberg, for instance, from Notre Dame would be a really good fit in Buffalo. He played in front of a quarterback that would be a little unorthodox at times, take off, run, like Ian Book did. Josh Allen does that a lot. Josh Allen, obviously, a much more polished overall player. But I think he would be a fit. There's some guys you can get in round 2. There's some other prospects as well. So if you do want to change the interior of the line, Quinn Meaners is someone you could look at. If you want to find someone that's maybe more of a pure center, although I think he could play guard too, Creed Humphrey comes to mind. So there's options for the Bills in the draft, but it's really going to end up coming down to what happens with Darrell Williams and John Feliciano.
All right. What about special teams? Because Andre Roberts continues to be one of the top return men in the NFL, but he's an unrestricted free agent. The punting situation sure improved. And Bass, as a rookie, started off, things didn't work out very well week 1 against the Jets, but after that, he was pretty good. So the special teams has really gotten better over the last several seasons.
Yeah, Heath Farwell comes in, and his first year was pretty rocky, and then the Bills had a lot of pieces to make the unit better, and what's no surprise, the overall unit plays extremely well. They add Tyler Matakevich. They add Taiwan Jones. Key pieces on special teams units, and they play better. Darrell Johnson progresses there. But in terms of the core, the punter, the kicker, Tyler Bass was pretty much lights out from week 8 on in the regular season. Really settled in, really showed that he had that big leg, could make those 50-plus yard kicks consistently. Corey Bajorquez had his best season. Obviously, wasn't utilized much. I want to say he only had 49 punts the entire season. So it's a good problem to have if you're Buffalo. He's, I believe, a restricted free agent. I wouldn't be shocked if they let him hit free agency or they don't tender him so that way they can sign him at a lower rate than what he would be getting. But I think he's going to be back in the fold. I think Buffalo knows, though, that they have a pretty high-octane offense. They can move the ball. They can move the chains on a consistent basis, or they feel they can. So at the end of the day, you don't want to pay a couple $1 million for a punter if you're not going to utilize him much. But if you can get Bajorquez in for the right price point, absolutely. And then Andre Roberts is going to be interesting as well because you said it. He's getting up there in age. He had a really good kick return average, obviously all-pro. You said it, Pro Bowler. Does really well in helping flip the field. But at the same time, the Bills kept 7 wide receivers this past season because he is pretty much strictly a return man. They don't really utilize him much in that passing attack. He got some snaps as a wide receiver, don't get me wrong, but he wasn't a big part of that offense. So do they want to stay with 7? Do they feel like there's other needs elsewhere? What does Andre Roberts want, especially at this age? Is he worth it year-wise, price-wise? So he's another guy that I'm iffy on returning. If he doesn't, then maybe Isaiah McKenzie becomes more of a priority because he can handle the returns.
Okay.
Maybe you find someone in this draft class that you think has that potential. Mid-rounds, I see a guy like Amari Rodgers, who has obviously punt return, a lot of experience. He has some kick return experience too, and he could be a playmaker on offense as they develop him, but he could handle that. So there's a lot up in the air in terms of the return man right now.
Okay, now on the defensive side, this is really where the Bills they seem to take a step back because early on with McDermott there, it looked, and of course Allen was young. Just the defense was the leading aspect of the team. That's really what defined them. But then this past year, just as Buffalo's offense started to soar, the defense just wasn't the same. Was there a particular reason that was the case?
I don't want to make excuses for the defense, the defensive line, anything like that. But I think the fact that there was no training camp, no OTAs, no chance to work with new teammates, and especially along the defensive line, I know that they all knew Eric Washington. A lot of them did. The new faces, Mario Addison, Vernon Butler, obviously played under him for quite a few years in Carolina. But there's still growing next to the people next to you. Then you have Star Lotulelei, who opts out for the season, and you had a lot of changes along the defensive line. So, Jerry Hughes was still getting consistent pressure, but he wasn't getting the sack numbers that you were hoping. Mario Addison, lowest sack total since I want to say 2013. He was averaging about 9 sacks per season before this upcoming year. Really fell short of that number this year. Is it age? Is it the fact that there wasn't a true offseason? Who knows? Interior, you probably had Quentin Jefferson playing out of his ideal role or spot. You had Vernon Butler that was inconsistent. You're rotating some Harrison Phillips, who struggled early in the year coming off of the ACL injury. Justin Zimmer's being brought in. Ed Oliver is getting consistent push, but maybe not meeting the expectations that some people had for him. So there's a lot of reasons up front that they struggled this year. I don't know if the answer is bring them back because you can save a lot of money. Cutting a Mario Addison, cutting a Quentin Jefferson, and a Vernon Butler. Do they cut all 3? Probably not, but 2 of the 3 I think go. You can find some cheaper options out there. You can draft some cheaper options. Find a true 1 technique that can learn this year behind Star Lotulelei. If they get J.J. Watt, all of a sudden the edge position looks a lot better.
That's for sure.
So, and then A.J. Epineza had some flashes as well.
By the way, you said Quentin Jefferson played out of position. What is his best spot on the line?
They were playing him sometimes at 1 tech. They were playing him sometimes at 3 tech. Obviously, in Seattle, he played inside, outside. I think when they first signed him, they maybe thought there was going to be a role for him even coming off the end to apply some pressure. And I think that it was kind of a defensive version of what happened to Darrell Williams in Carolina in 2019, where this past season they had him playing in a lot of spots where he never probably got comfortable or settled in one, and that kind of affected his overall play.
Yeah, and let's also keep in mind, I mean, Hughes, he's a little older. Addison's a little
Mm-hmm.
older. Murphy's a little older. So you would definitely think, because McDermott loves to rotate as much as, 8 defensive linemen, that this is an important part of his defense and is a very important part of his team, that this could be the first pick of the draft. I mean, it's possible, right?
Yeah, if there is the one thing I'll say is this edge class is deep. Once you hit edge 3, edge 4, that they're pretty similar to what you get at edge 9, edge 10. But if you can get one of the top guys to fall near number 30, maybe even trade up for them. If you can get someone that you think can be a difference maker in year one, absolutely. On the interior, I still think that they're happy with that Oliver's overall play. Again, you want to see more plays where he finishes the play, gets the sacks, records those impact stats and plays. But I thought that he actually pushed the offensive line around pretty well this year. It just went unheralded because of the rest of the play around him. So that whole defensive line is in play if you can find a difference maker at 30.
And by the way, before I move on to the back seven, is the point you made about COVID and not a lot of practice time and so forth. The other thing that I think is important, and I just feel that this was the case. Everybody wanted to talk about, the officials weren't calling penalties. That's why it was more wide open. I believe that the offense had an edge with for the obvious reason of nobody in the stands. That's number one. But number two, because I just think that it's the side of the ball that you have to have a little bit more motivation with fans in the stands is defense. And I think you take the fans out of the stands, it's just a little bit harder to motivate yourself. That's all. I'm also not just going to point at everybody and say that's the reason, but I think that's definitely part of a possibility that the defense just wasn't on par for most teams this past year. And I think we'll see a change once fans get back into the stands.
I think that's a very fair point that you made because, again, the players get juiced up on a third down play when the crowd's going wild. They're dancing, they're hyped up. There's no crowd, there's nothing there. It's just kind of going through the motions. But, and speaking to the other side of it, offenses could come up to the line. They didn't really have to worry about making changes late because they knew their teammates could hear them if they had to call something and change it. Where if there's a crowd noise, you're going to hustle the line earlier. You might have to use silent count. You might have to audible using, hand signals. There's a lot that I think could frustrate offenses this upcoming season that wasn't a frustration for them last year.
All right, now in the back seven, tell me, you mentioned Milano. You do not think he's going to be back?
No, at the end of the season press conference, Brendan Bean came out and said he's played well enough that he's earned the right to test free agency, which is code for we don't think we're going to get him back. I mean, he said the same thing about Shaq Lawson and Jordan Phillips the year before. Okay. Both signed deals where they averaged $10 million per year. Milano is projected to make between $12 and $14 million a year, and the Bills really just don't have that space out where they can pay him that kind of money when they know that Tremaine Edmonds is going to be coming up in a few years, and you can't allocate that much money to just one position. So if maybe his market isn't what he thinks it's going to be, the Bills could get him for a one-year deal, maybe around $10 million. But more times than not, as long as there's one suitor for his services that's serious, I think that he's gone. And then all of a sudden you have to wonder, okay, is A.J. Klein the answer? Is Tyrell Dodson the answer? Do you draft a linebacker at 30 or in the second round? Do you experiment with the big nickel or the Buffalo nickel? Last year they were supposedly in on Kyle Duggar, and they never got the chance to draft him. He was off the board by the time that guy came on the clock in round 2. But, Duggar maybe didn't have the greatest year, but Jeremy Chin, someone else that played that role, had an outstanding year in Carolina. So maybe they see it and they can say, okay, we were high on Duggar last year. There's some players in this year's draft class that we think we can utilize in that role. If we can get them round 1, probably round 2 might be the most ideal situation. Bring him in. They can even take that spot, that role, and really help in terms of covering the tight ends and having that athleticism on the field.
All right. And what about Edmonds? Because he makes plays, but overall, is he playing to the level that the Bills want him to play at?
I think there were times he was this past season, but he also struggled a lot. And again, I don't like to make excuses for players, but there was a part of the year that he was playing through a very serious shoulder injury,
Okay.
where he could barely move his arm, and that was affecting his tackling, and it looked like it was affecting his confidence. Once that injury got better, you could see more flashes. You add improvements along the defensive line. You get Star Latule
That's
back
right.
next year, who helps out a lot. And I think you'll see more flashes of the player that can make plays closer to the line than what he was doing this year. Up and down play for sure. Some disappointing moments, some plays where he still looked lost in coverage in terms of not knowing where he's supposed to be. But still, the flashes are there, and when he flashes, you can see he has the ability to be a special player in this league.
In the secondary, opposite Tre'Davious White, are the Bills definitely looking for a stable number two, or do they believe they have that player on the team?
I don't think they believe they have it on the team just yet. I will say that they like Dane Jackson's play. The seventh round pick out of Pitt when he was on the field this season. He had an interception in the Jets game at one game against Seattle. His first snap, he came on and they threw to DK Metcalf, and he wrapped up Metcalf immediately for no gain. He was then pulled into action or called into action against the Arizona Cardinals, matched up one-on-one against DeAndre Hopkins, and he gets credited with a pass breakup. So he showed some moments there that he could really hang with the big boys, but I think he had less than 200 defensive snaps. So that's not enough of a sample
Sure.
size. Levi Wallace, limited athletically, does some things well. Someone that you definitely want in the rotation if you feel I think he's another restricted free agent that if he's worth that, you can bring him back. But yeah, if you can find someone in the draft, an Ife Melflanu early that might you think could be a true number two cornerback, go for it. The one thing this regime has done is year in, year out, they've added a veteran to the room. So EJ Gaines, Vontae Davis, which isn't a great example since he quit midway through a game. They had Josh Norman, Kevin Johnson, I should say. So they've gone out there and they've always added a veteran. I wouldn't be shocked if they go with that approach again,
And
too.
then finally, Poyer and Hyde, they've been together now for several seasons, and they hardly miss any time. They're very steady back there. So, yeah, they are getting a little older, but I mean, did the Bills look at that situation and say, yeah, we're okay here for at least another year?
I think they do. I think actually I wouldn't be shocked if Micah Hyde gets an extension. I
Okay.
think that he's still playing at an extremely high level. They reworked Jordan Poyer's contract a little bit last year to give him some more money. They have Jaquan Johnson waiting in the wings, a player that they really like, that they're developing. Um, if they want to go back, they could get Dean Marlowe in here again, pretty cheap. He's been someone that's been with this team. He was in Carolina with McDermott. Had two interceptions in that Week 17 game against the Dolphins. He's not at the same level of player as Poyer and Hyde. Few are. Both of them are both Pro Bowl caliber players. But he's also a capable safety if either of them goes down. So I think they like that room. I think they're comfortable with that room for another year or two, especially if they were to re-sign a Marlowe on the cheap. But at the same time, if the right prospect is there, Brandon Beane will pull the trigger. He is someone that goes best player available, and he won't hesitate if that player's on the board.
Ryan, thanks a lot. I always like talking to you because, of course, you get opportunity to update us on what's going on with the Buffalo Bills, and this is a team on the rise. So it must be really fun now, finally covering this team again after some down years. So it's a great time. And as far as the offseason is concerned, since there's no combine and it's just still kind of not where the NFL would like it to be. How different is it going to be still for you this season as you start to prepare for free agency and the draft?
Well, it's definitely going to be a lot different, especially when it comes to the draft, because the combine's big for finding those diamonds in the rough. It's big in terms of how they're going to handle pro days, how they're going to handle visits. Probably be again Zoom, things like that. Those top 30 visits were really good indicators a few years ago. So it's definitely going to be different. But at the same time, this is the NFL. There's always something to talk about.
Ryan, appreciate it. And hopefully we'll get an opportunity to talk to you again sometime between free agency and the draft.
Hey, thanks for having me on.